Welcome to another episode of the Cat Breeding for Beginners podcast. I'm Pamela and I breed British Shorthairs in Perth, Western Australia. I have a real passion for cat breeding and exhibiting, and I want to share my knowledge and experience with you. I'm on a mission to help new cat breeders go from feeling intimidated, confused and having trouble getting started to confidently breeding happy and healthy cats whilst enjoying this amazing hobby. Before we get started, make sure you visit my website and download your copy of my helpful guide, Advice to New Breeders, where experienced breeders share some great tips they wish someone told them when they started breeding. You can find the link on my homepage at www.catbreedingforbeginners.com. Just look for the picture of Angelica with her kittens. I have a cat that's coming to me from Belgium. Now, this is my import boy, Toby. You might have seen him on my Facebook page. And as of the time of recording this podcast, he is actually in the air. He's in transit between Doha and Melbourne, and he's actually flying, and he'll be arriving later this evening. And Charlotte, my friend Charlotte, her cat arrived yesterday. Now, we imported cats at the same time, which was kind of because we went to Europe at the same time and we met the breeders at the same time. So it kind of worked out that way. But we're both importing cats into Australia. And because I've been sharing this, I've had a ton of questions about the process and a ton of questions from the Australian breeders, because it is a very big deal to bring a cat into Australia. It's a huge deal. It's a lot of effort and a lot of expense. You know, I've been asked this question a lot. How much does it all cost? How much do the different parts of it cost? And I've heard other breeders, using numbers and saying that they've spent, $15,000, $16,000, $17,000, $20,000 on cats, bringing them into Australia. And maybe that's true. That is not quite as much as what I've spent, but I have spent a ton of money on doing this. And it's because of all the different things we have to pay for. Now, if you are somebody somewhere else in the world, you will have expenses that are, pretty, depending on where you are. Sometimes you can bring cats straight into your country. Australia has strict quarantine. They have so many regulations, and timing is a big thing when it comes to Australia. But no matter where you are, you will find yourself looking at cats overseas and you'll think, oh, that cat's great. That cat ticks all the boxes. I really want that cat or kitten. Or something from that breeder, and then you'll make arrangements for it, and you'll find out how much the actual animal is, and you'll be like, yeah, okay, well, that's within my budget, I can do that. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. And literally, I've imported 3 cats from Europe now, and the actual cost of the cat itself was nothing compared to the cost of everything else that goes along with it. And the first thing you need to know when you're importing a cat to Australia, and this will apply if you have a cat that has a quarantine sort of situation as well. I think other countries do have quarantines, just no one has it as much as we do. One of the first things you'll have to pay for as an Australia breeder is you'll have to not only pay for the cat, but you're going to have to pay for its upkeep while it is still in the country of origin. And that is because from the moment that they get their rabies vaccine, so this applies for kittens as well as adults, because I had someone that was thinking that maybe, I think it was one of my newbies, was saying that they were thinking of adopting an adult from overseas, and, thinking that would mean they wouldn't have to do the cat could just come straight in. No, this applies to every single one. And even if they've had a rabies vaccine already, this still applies to them. They have to have a rabies vaccine, and then they have to wait a period of a week or 2 weeks, and they have to have a blood test. And it's not the rabies vaccine that starts the clock, it's the blood test. So from the blood test forward is when you do your 6 months wait overseas. So the breeder has to keep the cat for 6 months. And this is only if it's in the right category of country. It has to be a category 2 or 3 country. 2 is different. A category 3 country is with most of the world. If it's a category 4 country or 5 country, I think there's 5, you can't bring them at all. But if it's category 4, it actually needs to move to another country before it can come to you. So there is a lot of cost involved in that. And I know breeders who've bought cats from Russia and they've had to move them to boarding in the UK or somewhere like that, and then move them to Australia after 6 months. So 6 months of boarding at a commercial boarding category. Can you imagine how much that would cost? Luckily for me, the cats that I've brought over, the breeder has always been able to keep them for me, and I have just paid an extra amount of money for that. One of my cats I paid a lump sum, and the other cats I've paid an amount. 2 of my cats I paid a lump sum, and one of them I paid a monthly amount, which I was totally fine with. totally fine with it because I knew up front I was going to have to do it. But if you don't know up front you're going to have to do it, it's suddenly a lot more money. It is a lot more money. It's 6 months worth of food and litter and everything else. I've had people tell me that the breeders that have had their cats have charged them petrol money to take the cats to the vet appointments that it needs to go to. And that's the next thing, the vet appointments. Your cat's going to need more vet appointments than it would normally have because it's going to have to go have that rabies vaccine. It's then going to have to be checked by a government official vet who'll have to do a microchip ID for you. If you do the microchip ID, then your cat will only stay in quarantine here for 10 days as opposed to a month. And then you do the titer test, which is the blood test. So if you have to do that step in between, if you want to cut the amount of quarantine that your cat's going to do, which you're going to want to do for the cat's benefit, but you're also going to want to do for your pocket's benefit, your credit card's benefit, because that's another huge expense. We'll get to that in a moment. So you'll have to pay for these extra costs of the vet work, the rabies vaccination, the titer tests, and then you have to wait. And wait. And that waiting period is kind of risky because the cat's not in your control, but you own it because I'm guaranteeing you that you will have paid for it by then. And I absolutely paid for all of my cats by the time that they were 12 weeks old. And then after that, I paid for their upkeep. And they were under the control of the breeder. So I didn't have choices about what was happening with them, but they were my cats. So I had invested my money in them and I didn't have them. And this is the thing, that they could possibly not end up coming. And that's a bit of a drama as well. So there's a lot of risk involved and you have to really be comfortable with the person you're dealing with. So that was the next expense, which was the keeping them. And then after that, you've got the flights and the travel arrangements. And so the flights can be really expensive because, you know, the thing about it is, and I know people overseas get a bit freaked out by the way we have to do things, but our cats always travel in the hold of the plane. Always. Australia, there's no animals in the planes. And I know people who live in other countries are like, oh my God, I could never put my cat in the hold. Oh, no. Well, I could never put my cat in the plane. I'm not shoving one of my cats under the seat because our flights are so long. To get to the eastern states of Australia is 6 hours. I'm not putting my cat underneath a seat for that long. I would much rather have them in a nice roomy cat carrier in the hold of the plane without anybody, just nobody walking past and upsetting them or anything. If they soiled in the cage, that's okay. It's not going to upset any other passengers. That's how we do things. But when they come from overseas, that is absolutely how we do things. They always have to travel in the hold there as well. So you have to get a cat carrier as part of the expense, which will be, if you organise it through an agent, they'll organise it all for you. You're paying a premium for the agent to do all this work for you. Sometimes the breeders are actually switched on and have done it before and they can organise it all for you. But I find that really stressful because I just think if it's an agency that understands the importation requirements for Australia, you're probably not going to have any mistakes made. So you get a big carrier, so you've got to pay a lot of money for a cat carrier. And I swear to God, you're going to use it once for the cat to come over and then you're going to think, oh, what am I going to do with this massive big thing? They are huge and they are not practical to use after the cat arrives. And no one wants to buy them on Gumtree. So what I do with mine is I take the front door off them and I turn them into a cabin and put them in the pens and let the cats just sleep in them and they like it. It's like a big plastic cabin that you can have and it's sort of weatherproof. Anyway, so that's another expense you have to pay for. Then you have to pay for the flight itself. And the flight from Europe to Australia is a couple of $1,000s. It actually costs more for my cats to travel here than it does for me to go over there and come back. Literally, the one-way trip here for a cat costs a lot more than what a seat on the plane would cost. It's crazy. So they get, I guess there's a lot of extra handling involved. When they transit, they have to transit. They can't just do the one flight. There's no single flight they could go on. So they will transit either in Singapore or Doha or somewhere else, maybe in Dubai. They will travel halfway, then they will have them in a little area where they take them and they'll give them some water and some food and they have a pen and they have a litter tray and then they put them back on the next plane. So it is really expensive. It's a big cost, and the flight can sometimes cost more than the cat, often. And then they arrive in Australia and they get picked up by the quarantine people, and that's where your next expense comes. So quarantine. just to have the permit, you have to have a permit to bring an animal into Australia. Just for the permit alone was several $100s. And then you have the booking into the quarantine facility, and they'll stay there for 10 days. And you are paying pretty much by the day. You are paying a lot of money for them to stay there. And I think that all up with the fees and the permit and the 10 days in quarantine, I think was another $2,000, probably rounded up to $2,000. So that's another big expense. It could have even been more. And that expense changes a lot. That expense was a lot more this time than it was last time for me. So that's 10 days of boarding and it costs thousands of dollars. That's crazy. So that happens. And then the next expense that you're going to have is that your cat can't just walk out of quarantine and you got it unless you live in Melbourne. If you live in Melbourne, great, you don't have to pay this money. But if you don't live in Melbourne, the next thing you're going to have is your cat has to get its way back to you. So I have to engage another agent and they will pick up my cat from quarantine and they will do the exit process. They will do the exit appointment, the pickup appointment, and sign and everything on my behalf to pick up my cat. And then they will take my cat in his very fancy, expensive big carrier, which has been stripped of all the bedding. The bedding gets burnt and the carrier gets disinfected, and then the carrier is available for them to travel in. So then the cat is in a massive, huge carrier still. So when it does travel to me in Perth, it's going to cost me more than what it would normally, because normally they travel in a smaller carrier and you pay by the cubic sort of size because they're going in the hold. They're treated, they're sized up like freight. They're not treated like freight, but they're sized up like freight. So that's another expense. It's this big carrier that is going to be really wonderful for him to travel in, which he's traveling in right now. It's really roomy for him, but by the time he gets to Australia, it's sort of an extra expense you have to pay. So then that's going to cost me a couple of $100s to get him from Mickleham in Melbourne over to Perth. And then once he arrives in Perth, I'll pick him up at the airport, and then I think he's done for a little while. Before I have to spend any money on him. But yeah, that is the cost. So how much does that all come in at? Well, it's about... I literally have not added up how much it costs for the total amount of vet work and the total amount of his staying over in Belgium. And he was, a couple of $1,000s to buy in the first place, several $1,000s to buy in the first place. And then his transport was about $2,000, and then his quarantine was another couple of $1,000, and travelling to Perth is another couple of $100. So you can imagine how much that's added up to. It's added up to quite a lot of money. And the thing about it is that often when you're buying cats from overseas, I know if I wanted to buy I'm buying a stud cat. I've got a stud cat coming from Belgium. I've bought a stud cat from the Czech Republic. I've bought a cat from Germany. The cats themselves are actually, the breeding cats are actually cheaper to buy there than they are to buy here in Australia. And that comes down to supply and demand. There's more of them available. But the actual on costs and all the things that you add on in order to get them here are horrendously a huge amount of money. So when you are thinking of buying a cat from overseas, you really need to have a really good reason to be buying that cat in order to spend that money, because I could spend that same money and probably buy 3 of them here in Australia. I probably could, or I could pay for probably 5 matings that would give me a way bigger amount of choices than just one cat can give to me. But this is what we do, and I just think everybody should think really seriously before they go down the path of bringing in an import. I love that you're doing it. If you are doing it, that's amazing. That's genetic diversity coming into our country, which is just a big island and very hard, very, very hard to get cats into. So every time somebody brings something in, that's amazing, and you're doing a great service to the breed basically here by doing that. But please go into it with your eyes open. Go into it with your eyes open about how much money it's going to be, and make sure that you actually want to invest that much in what you're doing, and have a think about it first. And if you still decide to do it, amazing. Congratulations. You'll be feeling like me the day that Toby gets off that final flight from Melbourne and arrives here in Perth. And I just can't imagine. It's going to be so exciting. I'm going to video it. I mean, hopefully, depending on the time, I might even be able to have a video call with his breeder so that he can see him arriving, because he wouldn't have seen him since he left his home. And I'm sure that, Dita would appreciate that. And I'm hoping to share the moment with him, because it's been a thing. It's not just I'm buying a cat and the cat arrives. It's been a process where the two of us have had to build a very good relationship in order for this to all happen. And I just love that. I love that, you end up with friends for life from the people that you've imported from sometimes. I still love sending stuff to Quimby's owner and a breeder and to Jamaica's breeder. And they always love to see the updates of their cats in other countries. So that's really, really fun. So there's a lot of upside to it. There's a few downsides, and the downside is time and money. Time and money. All right. Hopefully that was helpful, because I've been asked a lot of questions about that. But by the time you're listening to this, I'm sure that my boy has arrived safely and that I've had that moment. And I just can't wait for that to happen. Okay. Bye for now. Thanks for listening. Make sure you visit www.catbreedingforbeginners.com, where you can find articles, guides, courses and more. Plus, make sure you check out my amazing New Cat Breeders Club. It's a supportive space where new cat breeders can learn, share and help each other. I only take new members a few times a year, so sign up to make sure you don't miss out.